When it comes to being healthy, you can't be in just one box. Today is kind of about inspiration and also shattering stigma. Today we are going to be joined by a former UCLA Bruin football player who is a cancer survivor and is now thriving while eating a plant-based diet. With that, we welcome a new friend, Pete Holland, to the exam room. Pete, thanks for being here, man.
Chuck, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I've been listening for several years now, and I was thrilled to meet you a couple months ago. And yeah, very happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And thank you for coming up and introducing yourself at the show that we did in New York City. You came by for that one. And I just couldn't believe it when you started telling me your story. Number one, everything that you had been through. But then number two, that you had flown all the way across the country to be there, man.
Yeah. Well, I should mention, I don't want to sound like too insane about coming out to the podcast, but yeah, my family and I were headed out to New York. We had plans to go the day after the podcast. And when I realized that this was going on, I told my wife, it was around my birthday, and I said, you know what I really want? I just want to go out a day early and go to this podcast. So my wife's from the Bronx. I took the train into the city, and that's when I met you.
Oh, man, it was a real pleasure to have you here that night, and an even greater pleasure to have you here today, because so often people come on this show and they are people who are really steeped in this plant-based space. And a lot of them, to be honest, are kind of, I guess you could put them into that category that falls under stereotypical vegan. But you are anything but the typical vegan, my friend. You are, as we said, a former big-time college football player and also a cancer survivor. So let's just dive into your story here, man, and let everybody know that no matter who you are in life, where you're going, what your circumstances, we got room for everybody in this pool, man. Being a football player, Division I, major school, did you guys ever even bring up the thought of eating more fruits and vegetables?
No, I mean, it was there in front of us, I suppose. I honestly don't even really remember. We would, so many things have changed in college football, but back then, during the season and during camp, you had training table, and that was, a team meal that would happen after practice. During two-a-days, it would happen, 2-3 times a day. And then during the season, it would be during the week, during practice, just for dinner. And it was calorie intensive, but we're talking like, cheesy pastas, pizza, fried potatoes. There was a salad option, I guess. I mean, I must have taken the salad option at some point, like at least added it to my plate. But, I just kind of cringe to think about how few vegetables I ate in those days. It was next to nothing, unless they were, they had been turned into, thrown on a pizza or something. So yeah, there was, it was all about getting enough calories. I guess, protein was a big thing. We would supplement, I remember, or taking Metrex shakes, but as far as like the composition of what we were eating, it was not on my mind, and I don't remember hearing a lot about it.
All right, but you're in UCLA, California, pretty progressive area. By and large, though, what did the word vegan mean to you at that point in your life?
Oh, I don't think I knew the word. I mean, this was, I hate to say it now because it sounds recent to me, the end of the 90s, but I realize that sounds like a very long time ago to a lot of people. But, I knew that vegetarians existed, but I really don't think I knew that the word vegan or what that was. I remember seeing, I don't know if you remember this, but when Roger Clemens, testified in front of, whatever, and that was in the late 2000s, they asked him if he was vegan because something about syringes and B12 and stuff, and he didn't know what it meant. And I remember thinking, that's funny that he doesn't know what that means. But 10 years earlier, I don't think I knew what that meant.
That's fair. And to kind of put this into perspective, though, I just love drawing this comparison where we're talking about nutrition education at such a large school where, I mean, you're talking about just some historic athletes have come out of this school. I mean, UCLA is major for basketball, for football, for baseball to a certain extent. I mean, just so many sports.
Yeah.
Did you have a drive or a thought that you might want to play on Sunday afternoons after your college days were over?
I thought that when I was in high school and when I was coming out, and getting recruited, I thought, why not me? Like I'm being recruited pretty, not nationally, but some serious schools were recruiting me. Stanford and UCLA were my last, kind of my last two, and I ended up choosing UCLA. So yeah, I guess I had dreamed of that as a kid, but and I thought, well, I'm on the track to do that. I mean, this is what guys who go to the NFL do. They go and play at a big school, and then they get better and better and better. And then it wasn't long. It was maybe a year or two into my college career that I realized that that was not going to be the path for me. And I wasn't good enough. I wasn't strong enough. But most importantly, I always like to note that I also didn't have the desire that you have to have because, I don't know. I guess I just thought it would be kind of automatic. Like you go to a good school and then you do everything they tell you to do. And then all of a sudden the NFL is interested in you. And it's not like that. I mean, you have to be gifted and strong and you got to have the want to. I mean, if you don't have that fierce desire to go to the NFL, you need to be seriously physically blessed to go, because a lot of guys have it's just like a combination of all those three. And those are the guys that go to the NFL. And then the guys that thrive in the NFL, I don't even know what that formula is. It's kind of beyond me, but I had some good friends that played in the NFL, but not very long careers. And they were incredible college football players, but it just goes to show how good the greats are.
And working in this arena now, but still maintaining my passion for sports, I always wonder because you're talking about really kind of a razor thin margin between, being good, being great, and then being the GOAT, the greatest of all time. It is really a razor thin margin. And I just wonder if for those who are not yet in the GOAT category or even a great category, they're pretty good, but they're not great. If they were to tweak their diet, give themselves a little bit of an edge when it comes to nutrition, would that make a difference in terms of their long-term prospects for going pro?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to speak about that because I, was kind of, I rose to the level of my incompetence, like they say, I was good, very good in high school. And then in college, I was pretty good enough to start, good enough to be a captain, but like, no interest from the pros. So, but yeah, I know at that, when you talk about the razor thin margin, I mean, everything makes a difference, right? Now, granted, I got to say there's kind of a gap in my plant-based knowledge, and that's that, now I'm 46. And so my interests are in, being as healthy as I can be, being at a really healthy weight that feels good. I like to run. I like to trail run. So I like to be at a weight that feels good running. And also longevity. Those are my interests now. So if I have my wife's nephew is a sophomore in high school now, and he's playing football, and he's like, bulking up with all the same foods that I bulked up on. And if he came to me and said, how do I bulk up? How do I do what I want to do physically while eating the way you eat? I would have to do some serious research because that just is not, that's just not why I do it. I know it's possible. I mean, you see the guys in the pros that are following a plant-based diet, and it's possible. But I guess it's just so far outside of my goals for me now that that I don't really have any expertise on that. But sure, I mean, for guys that are looking for every little edge, I mean, I guess why not, why not try it?
And now, even though you're not eating a plant-based diet to bulk up, obviously you're a runner now. You're not a big-time lineman anymore. You're out there running. I mean, that does take a toll on your body. What have you noticed in terms of recovery time when you really push yourself out on the trail? How does that compare compared to where you were back in college when you were just constantly beating and banging and then not really paying attention to what it was you were eating?
Yeah. I mean, apples and oranges in a way, because I remember Sunday mornings, after a game, and it was like, you felt like you'd been physically beaten, and so we had a Chinese place down the alley from where we lived in West LA at the time, and we would eat there maybe twice on Sundays, just because it was like 50 yards away, and we're eating like, I don't know, sweet and sour chicken and stuff like that. So it's hard to say, but my recovery now is great. And the thing, I listen to like Jim Loomis a lot. I'm very interested in what he has to say, because I know he's he does like marathons and stuff beyond what I do. So I feel like, I can really push it and do like 8 or 10 miles on the trail. And the next morning, I usually don't run again, but I could. And that's not something I ever felt when I was playing ball. Again, on the trail, no one's like slamming into me, so it's a little bit different. But the other thing I notice is just like the anti-inflammatory thing, because at this point, whether it's like stuff that is kind of left over from football or just results of, being in my mid 40s now, I'm very aware of, just aches and pains, and trail running. It can be hard on your knees. It can be hard on your feet and stuff like that. And I just noticed that I feel really good, and I'm not going to go back and start eating meat and cheese to like do a comparison. I just think it seems like I feel as good as I can feel, which is incredible. I should also mention that, about 3 years ago, when I started eating this way, I think I weighed about 235. Now I'm at about 203. And so I was running a little bit then, and it was tough. And now I think back, I go, man, I was 30 pounds heavier. If you told me, if I was going for a run this morning and you said, hey, carry 30 pounds of weights with you, I would say there's no way I can do that. But it's just amazing that, that's what I was doing. And that is really part of what makes it feel so good for the exercise I do now, is just that I'm not carrying around a ton of extra weight.
Yeah, think about this when it comes to 30 pounds. The 5-gallon jug of water that people put on top of the water cooler at the office, or maybe they have one at their house, that's 25 pounds. It's a little bit less than 25 pounds. So you've got one of those plus an additional 5. That's what you've taken off. That's an enormous amount of weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even if someone says, oh, I lost 5 pounds, I'll go in my basement and pick up a 5-pound, like weight that I put on the barbell. And I'm like, okay, it's not nothing. I don't want to carry that on a run, So, yeah, I think, that really is, you've mentioned on other shows, people talking about weight loss. It's like, you don't want to get into weight shaming, but it's undeniable that having a lower body weight is kind of, very helpful in avoiding certain conditions. But also just the feeling of giving your body a break and saying, like, I'm not going to make my body carry around this weight. It really, it's really important. And sometimes, when people kind of tiptoe around the body shaming thing, it just, I hate for that to be ignored. Just the fact that, it's just much easier on your body to carry around less weight. And I'm, at my heaviest, I was 278 going into camp one year. I played at about 265. And now I'm 60 pounds less. And there's no, just in terms of how I feel from day to day, there's just no comparison.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, could you imagine being in your mid 40s now and being at 265 and what that would feel like present day?
No, I can't imagine it. When in 2017, I went to graduate school, and in most of my adult life, I worked in restaurants. So while I was eating a lot of kind of rich food, I was walking around for the shift because I was you know, a server and a bartender and doing all these things on my feet. And that, people underestimate that, but you burn a lot more calories walking around for 6 hours than you would, going for a run, even an intense run for 1 hour. And so, but I got out of the restaurant business in 2017, and I went to graduate school. And so I didn't have that kind of built-in exercise. And I was sitting around a lot because I was in school. And that's when, I guess when I went into grad school, I was about 210. And then when I left, I was about 235. But I didn't even really notice it happening because it was over 2 years. And that was, nowhere near my playing weight, but it was still, creeping up into football territory, a little too much.
Did you play mind games with yourself to kind of justify not making changes on a particular day because it's just easier to continue down that path? Like, I love talking about insight and just the way that we were able to communicate with ourselves and convince ourselves that we don't have to make these changes for whatever the reason. And the reason could be completely, just asinine to literally everybody else on the face of the planet. But it makes sense to you because it was your thought originally. Did you play those mind games?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, it could be, you're right. It could be asinine to other people, but everybody has those things. And for me, one of the big things is, since I worked in fine dining and I still work in the wine business, and I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I still work in the wine business. We have an idea of ourselves and the kind of person we think we want to be. And I find that guides a lot of our decisions, whether it makes sense or not. And one of the reasons I never thought about whether alcohol might not be the best thing for me in my life was that I wanted to be like a good time guy, like a guy who would have a glass of wine with you, and a guy who had good wine to open when you came over, and a guy who, when he was eating a meal, would have the perfect wine to go with it. I liked that idea of myself. And so for a long time, that's why I never considered not drinking alcohol. People people think that you need to be, in the gutter before quitting alcohol can improve your life. And it's not true. But I used to think that. And a lot of it was, kind of guided by like, well, I don't have a problem. I'm just I'm just fun. I'm just fun. I want to be fun. And so food is the same way. People have an idea of what vegan is, and then people have an idea of, I always took pride in the fact that, if I was going to your house for dinner and you were cooking, like, I was going to eat it and I was going to love it. And in my mind, if someone had some kind of, restriction or limitation, I would think, oh, that's so rude. Why can't you just be fun like me and agreeable? And so those were really the ideas I had of myself that, now keep in mind, this is all, subconscious, right? I wasn't weighing quitting alcohol or going vegan and saying, no, but I really like being fun. It was just kind of my guiding principle. And so, that was something I had to fight against. Fortunately, during the pandemic, there was no chance to be fun or agreeable, no social pressure. And that was when I started making some big changes.
All right, we're about to dive into the real heart of your story that I think a lot of people are going to identify with. But first of all, before we do that, I just got to say that my mind is blown that you, as a non-drinker, are working in the wine business. I think, man, you are truly like a man that can walk in any circle quite comfortably. That is just extraordinary, man.
Well, I'm a writer in the wine business, and my job is to sell wine with the words I write about it. And so I have decades of wine memory that I draw upon. So it's not as tough as you would think, but thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I got you. I wonder if you can kind of use that experience then and write about like vegan food so eloquently. I mean, to be a writer in the food business or the wine business in this case, I mean, you really do have to paint with words. And I would imagine you would be able to draw upon your experience writing about wine and apply that magnificently when it comes to food.
Yeah, I would like to give it a shot. One of the things that I notice about kind of the vegan food media, I won't mention any names, but there's a magazine that I get that's vegan. But I guess my issue with it is that it spends so much, it dedicates so much of its space to foods that are like, can you believe this is vegan? Doesn't it look and feel and taste just like a fried chicken sandwich? And the option, what they write about, it's a little bit junky. It's like maybe if someone wants to be vegan because they don't want to harm animals, but they still want to have a fried chicken sandwich or something. The magazine is great for them, but when so the health thing is a little bit on the side. And so that I guess would be one of my criticisms, but maybe that's an opportunity to like get in there and change things and write about stuff that's, oil free. Which I've noticed is kind of the thing that when you tell someone that you don't eat any animal products, they're like, okay, yeah, okay, you're vegan, I understand it. But then when you tell them you don't use any oil, that's when people go, well, I don't even understand how you cook food then.
All right, well, I'm going to give you a writing assignment. The next time you come to the Washington, D.C. area, I'm going to set up a dinner for you at one of my favorite restaurants in the world outside of D.C., right by Dulles Airport, called Green Fare. It's
Okay.
run by a dear friend of mine, Gwen Whitaker, and that is the only restaurant that I know of that is 100% organic and salt, oil, and sugar free. So we're
Really
talking
salt
like,
free. Even I haven't gotten to the salt free point yet.
bro, we're talking like the upper echelon of health. And I would just love to get a column from you about the
Yeah.
food at Green Fair. And like, we'll set it up. You will be there. I'll bring Jim Loomis and we'll have a grand old time breaking the proverbial bread. But then I want that recap with your
Yeah.
writer's touch, man.
Yeah. So my wife went to Georgetown and she has a reunion next year. And so maybe this is my excuse to go out there.
All right, man. Next time you're coming, you just let me know. All
All
right.
right. Hey, I will hold you to that. So don't,
Standing
just be ready.
invitation. Standing invitation. Standing
Cool.
invitation.
All right.
All right, man. Let's get into your story here. You also, though, were diagnosed with cancer at one point in your life. Talk to us about that. What happened, man?
Yeah. So 10 years ago, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, and I just gotten married, no kids yet. And was, working in restaurants and still just kind of living the life, the life of a restaurant guy. And I had it was fall, actually around this time of year, mid-October, I guess. And I had a little bit like of a shortness of breath issue that I was noticing when I would talk to a table at the restaurant because we had this kind of long introductory spiel. And I found myself having to take a little breath during it, which was weird. And so I had health insurance at the time. And so on my day off, I just thought it was like a lingering cold or something, but it didn't go away. And so after a week or two, I was like, you know what? I've got insurance. I'm going to go to the doctor. And so I went and saw this doctor, Dr. Sanders in Nashville. First time I met her, but she will always have a place in my heart. And I told her what was going on, and she goes, I don't know. Maybe some people develop asthma as adults, and maybe it's that. And I didn't say this, but I was thinking like, look, I was a college football player. I run trails all the time. I don't think I'm just getting asthma out of the blue, and she said, well, we can I'll send you for a chest x-ray if you want, or not if you want, but let's do that. And so I did it, and I went next door afterwards and I was having lunch, and I got a call, and they asked me to come back in. And I thought, that's not good. No doctor has ever called me to say, come back in. And so, I went in and had some kind of scan, like a CT scan or something. And then I got a call from her that evening, and she told me there was something in my lung. And I thought I was dead, I looked up online, I looked up lung cancer because she said lung, and I I looked it up and I thought, well, okay, lung cancer, I don't smoke, but there's such a thing as bad luck. And if, based on what I know they tell you not to just go to the internet and for medical advice, but of course I went straight to the internet. And realized life expectancy if you have lung cancer is 2 years or something. And I thought, I'm dead. A couple days passed, and she told me, I'm going to send you to a pulmonologist. And I went in and I saw this doctor, and he said, look, even if you had smoked 2 packs a day for 30 years, it would be, lung cancer. I doubt it's that. But it could be, a couple things, and one of the things he mentioned is Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so, kind of skipping over the rest of the diagnosis, process, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it turned out the thing that was giving me the shortness of breath was kind of an infection in my lungs that I had because my immune system was compromised because of the lymphoma. So that was a shock. That was a shock to me because I'd always thought, I'm healthy, and bad health things happen to everyone but me. So that kicked off a treatment that lasted about 7 months. The good thing about Hodgkin's is it was one of the first cancers, quote unquote, cured by chemotherapy back in the 70s, and the treatment's kind of been refined since then. But it's a very go-to treatment. If you're going to have cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma is not the worst thing to have. And so I did 6 months of brutal chemotherapy, and then about a month of radiation treatment. And I had more hair when I went in than when I came out, and I do now. But I'm good now. But and I never, the advice kind of coming out, I don't know if my doctor gave me the advice, but stuff that I've read is that, based on not the cancer itself, but because of the treatment, and the treatments can be hard on your lungs and heart, and that you're supposed to behave, post-treatment as kind of someone who has high risk for heart disease. And I didn't take that to heart for a long time. But now I see the value in, like, I kind of forget that I had cancer a lot of days, or most days. But then I think, well, this thing I'm doing to benefit my weight and my overall health and my running, it's also serving me in kind of reducing the chance of a secondary cancer, which is really the risk after, radiation and chemo.
All right, you mentioned that these treatments were just brutal. And the majority of people who are watching and listening today have been fortunate enough to have never gone through them. Can you walk us through them with a little bit more detail, what it's actually like for someone going through that?
Yeah, sure. So the treatment, well, first I should say that if you've never had cancer, you hear chemo and you think it's like this one thing. You get chemo and that's the end of the story. But chemo just refers to a treatment using intravenous chemicals, and it's different for every cancer. So the tried and true treatment for Hodgkin's is called ABVD, which is adriamycin, bleomycin, vinblastine, and dacarbazine. All right. I love dacarbazine because it's like, there's no way that can feel good, right? It's just such a terrible word. And so you go in every 2 weeks, and they pump these into you, and you have to sit there for about 3 or 4 hours. And then you feel terrible, but not immediately, because they give you a steroid with it. So for the day, I remember not believing how good I felt the afternoon of my first chemo treatment. I was like, this is a piece of cake, man. Well, it turns out it's because that steroid was in me and I was feeling good artificially. And then that wears off over a couple days. And I could barely, after 2 days, I could barely turn my head to look at the alarm clock. And I'm not being dramatic here. I thought, if this is how it's going to be, I can't do it. There's no way I can do it. Fortunately, your body kind of gets you, or my body got used to it. And so the treatments got a little bit better in terms of just knocking me out and that brutal fatigue that I experienced. I experienced it the second time, but a little bit less, and then a little bit less the third time. But the thing that happens also is, so that got better over time. So let's say like that. But then other things get worse over time. And one of the things, I think it's bleomycin, one of the potential side effects is neuropathy, right? Tingling in your hands and feet. And so my doctor told me like, hey, this is possible. So let me know if you have any tingling, And after about 3 treatments, I told him, I've got a little tingling in my toes. And he goes, okay, well, let me know if it gets into your feet. And so the next week I'm like, in my feet. And he goes, okay, but now tell me if it gets to your ankles. And I go, all right, it's in my ankles now. And so I had what's called foot drop, which is where you basically, your feet get so numb that they can't do all the little things that feet do when you walk. And so I would shuffle around like I don't want to say 90 years old, because there are a lot of really healthy 90-year-olds on, on plant food diets, but a very, very old and feeble man because of this neuropathy. At the start I don't want to get into it, but like constipation so bad that I was desperate for a solution. And the other thing is it wreaks havoc on your immune system. So I did have to spend about 3 or 4 days in the hospital because my, I guess white blood cell count or whatever was pretty much at 0. So I had a little fever, and that's kind of an emergency when it comes to someone on chemotherapy. I had a blood clot in my arm, which doesn't sound like the world's biggest deal, except I had to go on blood thinners for months. All this stuff, it's kind of coming back to me now, but when I say brutal, that's what I mean.
It certainly sounds that way, and I think that is even harder for somebody who was in your position, who was this big, hulking, strong athlete. Nothing could touch me. I'm invincible. That kind of warrior mentality that you need to play athletics at such a high level. And I would think that if you feel comfortable getting a little bit vulnerable with this, like you probably had some really dark days mentally.
Yeah, it was really bad, especially at the start. It's funny going into it, I thought, um, is my hair going to fall out? That was a concern. Is my hair going to fall out, and how bad am I going to feel in the short term? And after the first treatment, my hair was still there, and I was like, okay, good. And then after the second treatment, it started coming out, and I go, okay, well, there's the answer to that question. But as far as, it's funny about that, Chuck, about the dark days. I mean, there was always a light at the end of the tunnel. And even though, except for those 2 days when I thought I had lung cancer, I never really had the, I always kind of knew I was going to get better. And I think, it's funny, I have had cancer, but I still had that feeling like, okay, well, once I get past this, I'll be, healthy forever again. We just have these ideas that stick. And because of how I was feeling, I guess I had some pretty dark days, but um, it never, it's funny. I look back at that time and there was some positive, I mean, people, what a cliche, right? Like best thing that ever happened to me, all that stuff. But I do have some really positive memories of those times. And I took a lot of work off. I was able to spend a lot of time with my wife, and it made me kind of reevaluate what I was doing, like think a lot about, I was pursuing songwriting in Nashville at the time, and it gave me an excuse to step away from that and think about, where I saw that going. And so, yeah, it was a strange mix of bitter and sweet, I watched a lot of football. I don't watch a lot of football now, and I hadn't up till then, but I was on the couch all day in the middle of winter, and I was like, well, I might as well get into this again. And so I was watching a lot of football, and it was just, yeah, I mean, just a very mixed time. But for me, it really proved that, things happen to everybody, and no matter what you think about yourself, that you're bulletproof or invincible or whatever, it's not true. But it also, I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish I cared as much about diet then as I do now. I knew that. I think I got some cancer fighting books, like cancer fighting recipes and stuff, and some involved meat, I remember, but my palate was so devastated by chemo. That's another thing that it does, that I really I wanted very few foods, and the ones I did were like turkey sandwiches with Kraft singles on them, like really bland stuff. And so I was like, I'm just going to eat what sounds good just so I can get the calories in. But now that I know a lot more about, cancer promotion and stuff like that, I mean, all this like stuff from, the China study and T. Colin Campbell and all this amazing stuff that we know now about animal protein versus plant protein, it makes me wonder, I mean, if I were plant-based before, maybe it would have stopped in its tracks and I never would have even had the cancer. But I also wonder if I could have tolerated those foods or just knew more about, plant foods at the time, if it would have been a little bit easier on my body. I'll never know.
No, but you know what? I think that every experience we go through in life brings us to the person who we are today. So good, bad, indifferent, whatever. I think
Without a
that you're a
doubt.
pretty good guy today. So everything seems to be working out in the end for you, even though it was a bumpy road. And before we talk more about diet, a couple of things that I want to share with you. Number one, I love the fact that you said that you kind of felt like there was always light at the end of the tunnel. I think that that's so important when you're working toward a goal, whether it's health or anything else. I think that that is the right mentality. And number two, about your hair, bro, you pull off bald damn well. I'm going to be like
Thank you.
flat out honest with you, man. You are a handsome guy.
Thank you. I've got a good head shape. My wife tells me that all the time. And it's funny. I ride a bike around a lot just to get where I'm going. And there's nothing better for bicycling than being bald, because when you get somewhere, if you have hair and you ride a bike somewhere and you walk in, people know you rode a bike. That's if you wear a helmet, because it messes up your hair. But like, if you're bald, you walk in there, it's like you just stepped out of the shower. Like no one can tell. And so now, yeah, I remember, if I hear a friend talking about like, oh, I'm going to get a haircut, or I don't like my haircut, and I'm like, you guys are so vain, man. Why don't you just shave your heads?
Dude, it's so good, man. And it's like you just like walk out of the shower, you don't have to bother with the towel or the hair dryer, like it's freeing. Now,
Oh yeah.
I once shaved my head for a spell after I initially lost a lot of weight. Matter of fact, as I was going through a lot of the weight loss, I could not pull it off like you do, man. I fully support your decision. I got to put in the extra effort with what's happening up here right now, though, man. But
And you
someday,
had long
maybe
hair,
I'll
right? I saw some photos of you where you had like a ponytail going on, or no,
but
kind of like a pulled back on the top but shaved on the sides thing.
yeah, I did the man bun thing just to get a rise out of my wife for a little while, and then I was like, when am I going to grow my hair long again? So I'm just going to keep it for a while. And then it was just like the pandemic happened. I couldn't get to a proper barber shop, and like my sides were all kinds of jacked, and I was just like, we got to shave this. We got to
Yeah,
get rid of it.
every once in a while, like if I see a pic, like Rich Roll looks cool, right? Like he's got style. Like he wears cool glasses and his hair is always cool. And when I see his hair, I'm like, all right, I guess I kind of miss having hair. If it looked that cool all the time, but that's kind of um, it's kind of a trap, because my hair never looked that cool. So, um, but
I
I
love
want to
this
say
show.
something about the light at the end of the tunnel thing, and bring it to kind of weight and diet. When I think about this stuff, and like I was listening to a podcast with Anthony Masiello on it, and he told a story about being a young dad and sitting there and his kids are on a roller coaster and he realized he couldn't go on with them. And when I think about like, the you don't want to make people feel bad about their weight. Everyone should love themselves, which is true. But I have to remind myself that people suffer because of their weight. They really do. I mean, not everybody, but only the individual knows. But when I hear stories about like Anthony Masiello tells, when he realizes, like, because of my weight, I'm not going to be the father I want to be, then I think, this is worthwhile, and you don't have to be, 400 pounds to suffer because of your weight. I mean, between COVID or just how we feel about how we look, or whatever we're carrying around, it makes a big difference to the individual, even though societally we kind of say, oh, well, everyone should just feel good about who they are. Like, yes, of course, you should feel good about who you are, but it's not, you're not doing something wrong if you feel like, I want to lose weight because I think I will feel better or look better or be a better father. Those are so legitimate. And I guess when I think about going on, a show like this, I just want someone to hear, someone who, weighs 240 and wants to weigh 210 or whatever, that, that this is the way, and it does feel great, So, kind of bring the chemo light at the end of the tunnel thing around to a weight light at the end of the tunnel thing. I just always have to remind myself that people, this really affects people, not just physically, but psychologically, and eating this way is a great way to improve your life,
Couldn't have said it any better myself, man. I want to ask you, as you're going through the treatments and obviously you're seeing this light at the end of the tunnel, at any point during your treatment cycle, did they talk to you about modifying your diet, maybe limiting animal proteins, anything like that come up?
No,
So that
period.
was all like you went down the rabbit hole yourself
Well, I mean,
later.
the so I didn't, I finished my treatment in 2014. I didn't become plant-based until 2020. So, um, I guess it was on my mind a little because someone gave us a book that was like the Cancer Fighting Kitchen, and my wife made this wonderful vegetable broth that I could drink, hot mugs of it. But honestly, like, I feel so bad because I kind of just let it sit there because I didn't want it, but I didn't. Um, I would rather eat crap, at the time. And I think that was a comfort thing. It was a calorie thing, but it was also a comfort thing. And so that, I had a great doctor in Nashville. But no, nobody told me what I should or shouldn't be eating. And I remember, I was kind of indulging my palate because I was like, oh, I need strength, so I'm going to eat a large pizza, whatever. And I remember my weight kind of ticking up a little bit because I couldn't eat after my first chemo treatment because I felt so bad, and my weight got really, really low, and then it started ticking up, and then it was at, where I was when I started, let's say, and then it was 8 pounds higher, and I remember telling my doctor, like, yeah, I'm, put on some weight. I think it must be that steroid. And he's kind of like, no, it's not the steroid, you know? So I was trying to blame the steroid, but it turns out I was just eating, I wasn't doing much physically, and I was eating, a ton of really, fatty foods and stuff. But no, it wasn't a part of the conversation. And I remember, I don't know when I stumbled upon Chris Wark, and, Chris Beat Cancer was his website, and then a book and stuff. And um, when I heard his story, I thought, this is, I guess in my mind, I kind of believed in food as medicine, in theory. But when it came time for me to make the decision on cancer, I was like, of course, give me the chemo, like, give me the standard treatment. And when I heard about Chris Beat Cancer, I remember thinking, like, this is dangerous for people to pay attention to this guy and potentially ignore, or say no to a proven treatment. Um, Now I don't see it that way. I'm not sure, if I had lymphoma again, I would have said no to the chemo and just eaten plant-based. But now what I understand about cancer promotion and stuff like that, I realize that there's a legitimate message there. Um, of course, it'd be up to everybody to say no to chemotherapy when that's a proven treatment. It would be pretty audacious, but chemotherapy, the standard treatment worked for me, but I do have some lung damage. My feet are still not completely awake yet. So I am, I'm healthy, but there are still lingering effects of the chemo. So, you pay a price for doing chemo. But it's like a shotgun blast to your body, and it can damage stuff that was fine. So I see that whole thing a little bit differently now.
Yeah, but I mean, given where you were at the time, what you knew at the time, I can't imagine that you would have a regret about
No,
that decision.
no, not at all. I mean, no, not at all. But now thinking about, what a danger that, secondary cancers, cancers caused by the treatment are, I have no doubt um, that the way I live now is the way to do it. But the stakes don't seem as high as, when you have the disease at the moment.
And do you remember the day that the doctor told you, say, "Hey, Pete, I got some good news, buddy. You're in remission. No more cancer."
You know, it wasn't it wasn't quite as dramatic. They take a scan. I had what's called stage 2B, or stage 2 unfavorable. And it turns out that the difference between stage 2 favorable and unfavorable is just the size of a tumor. If it's like, 5 centimeters or more, it's unfavorable. And the tumor in Hodgkin's often manifests in your mediastinum, the space between your lungs. And so mine was big. So I had stage 2B. And after chemo, I think after maybe 3 or 4 treatments, they take a scan just to be like, is this working? Because they're trying to shrink the tumor. And so when they took that scan, I realized, I looked at it and it was night and day. I wish I had sent you a picture, but the tumor was essentially gone. So we knew the chemo was working. So that was a huge psychological lift for me, which is like, this sucks, but it's working. And then it dragged on, and that's when these little side effects started piling up. And so I already kind of considered myself like in remission. I was like, okay, they got that big tumor. Now they're just, making sure that you know they're being safe. Nothing's going to come back. At the end, they irradiate it to scorch the earth a little bit more. But the great moment for me was my last chemo treatment. And I came home, and my wife was at work, and when she came home, I just met her in the yard and we cried. I mean, it was this huge release, because it sucked so bad, and I had radiation after that for a month, and people ask me like, what was worse, chemo or radiation? And I go, for me, radiation was like, it wasn't even as bad as going to the dentist. Like, and I had to go every day of the week, but I didn't care because chemo was done. And so that was really the big moment. And then I think I had to go in after 6 months, and they checked me, and then after a year, and then for a couple of years after you're done, you just go in once a year for a scan. And now I don't even have to have scans. It's just, I have a doctor, I see him once a year, but it's like, if there were no signs of anything, then, because there's a cost on your body to doing a CT scan, So that was really the moment for me where I felt like, we did it.
Powerful stuff, man. That's a heck of a journey. And it sets you up perfectly to write what was, I think, an extraordinary piece on another football player who had a similar journey, talking about Eric Berry of the Kansas City Chiefs. Um, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, there were just thousands and thousands and thousands of articles written about Eric Berry and his return to the game after battling cancer. But you, having been a football player yourself, having gone through this yourself, to be able to put that into words, to sit down with him, to really craft what this whole journey was like. I mean, what a privilege it must have been to be able to pen that piece.
Yeah, it was. I should note I didn't get to talk to him. This was just all from my perspective. But yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, so I was diagnosed in December of 2013, and a year later, um, Eric Berry, who played for the Chiefs, he was an All-Pro and a safety, and played at University of Tennessee before that. I think he's from Georgia. I'm not sure, but I think so. Anyway, he left a game because of some chest pain or something. And then they gave him an x-ray and they said he had a mass in his chest. And that was exactly what the doctor told me. You've got a mass in your chest. And I said, I bet he's got Hodgkin's. And sure enough, he had Hodgkin's. So he left the team, went through his treatment. And, keep in mind that like June was when I was coming out of my treatment, and I did some radiation after that of 2013. So if you put him on the same timeline, then in 2015, in the summer, he'd be finishing up his treatment. And so he went to camp, in August to practice with the Chiefs back at practice. And that was, people were writing about this, but I was like, I don't think people get how incredible that is, that, I don't know, I could barely even just go about life as a regular guy, after that treatment, and he's going to go play football for the Chiefs. And so one of the things I realized when I was, going through my treatment is that I didn't think songwriting was the path for me, but I thought, writing like nonfiction stuff was. And so I had been writing a lot. I'd been blogging a bit, and I had a couple things that I thought, this can get published. And those things didn't get published. But I stayed up basically all night writing this thing about Eric Berry. And I told my wife, this is going to get published. Someone's going to want to read this. This is going to be my first professional piece of writing. And so the Kansas City Star ended up publishing it. And it was very rewarding for me. I had some nice, feedback from people in the area who emailed me. And one woman was going through, her own cancer thing. And it was just, I felt very lucky that was kind of my entry, into professional writing, something that I could write about, so personally.
And we'll go ahead and include a link to that article or in that piece that you published. I mean, it's so good. And by the way, as somebody who has spent their entire career in media, to have your first piece published by a newspaper like the Kansas City Star, I mean, bro, that's like making your football debut for the Chiefs. I mean, like, that is big time stuff, dude.
No, it was great, and thank you. And I, when I finished that, I go, well, who would want to read this? So I think I reached out to like, ESPN or maybe Grantland at the time. And then maybe Knoxville, the Tennessean in Nashville where I was living, with some interest, but the guy from the Tennessean wanted to hack it down quite a bit. And I tried the Kansas City Star, but I had no connections, And so I got in touch with them through a form on their website, which was like, honestly, the form you would use if your paper kept showing up wet. It was not a direct line to an editor, And so I did that, and I said, I've got this piece I want you to read, and I think, of interest. And the next week I had an email from their sports editor basically saying, I will read this. But what's funny is it kind of showed the path that my email had taken. And it was a bunch of just forwards with question marks, like, what do I do with this? And I thank the Kansas City Star very much because anywhere along that chain, someone could have just gone like, just throw this away, but it made it there. I sent it to the guy, and, 10 minutes later he said, let's do this. So it was very, very fortunate.
My best guess, in having worked in newsrooms myself, is that they saw value in that piece. Otherwise, it would have been discarded because I can guarantee you, just as you found that submission form, others have as well. And their submissions definitely did not make it up the email chain. But because here we have a football player who can really eloquently write about Eric Berry's journey based off of his own personal experience, I mean, that's what really sold it for the Star.
Yeah, it was. It was from the heart, and the time was right. I mean, football season was starting. The stars aligned.
Absolutely. And I know as we wrap things up here, you're actually you're not being selfish about all of the knowledge that you've required over the years. You've encouraged some of your former teammates at UCLA to improve their health as well, take a closer look at their diet. Do you find that more and more guys are kind of coming out of the woodwork and asking you questions and kind of like getting ready, getting mentally prepared to get over the stigma that is a plant-based diet?
I guess because I have two friends that have adopted a plant-based diet, two former teammates, then I will say yes. Some are prepared to get over the stigma, but I wish it were more, and that's the thing. You want to spread the word, but I want to sound like some, zealot who's just out there, telling people how they should live their life. But I do want people to feel free to ask me about it. So if anyone listening ever wants to talk to me personally about it, I will put my contact information in the notes, because I would love to do it. But the thing with about 2 years ago, I went back to a little reunion that we had at UCLA and I was hanging out with two of my buddies from the team, and I was already plant-based, and we got pizza late night at this place, and you could build your own. And I was like, okay, well, no oil, no cheese. And they were kind of like, what's this guy doing? But one of those friends got in touch earlier this year because he'd gone to the doctor and something was a little bit not to his doctor's liking, So all of a sudden it came back to him what I was doing. And actually, I think his text said something about, thanks for ruining meat for me. And it's because apparently I told him to read How Not to Die. And he read How Not to Die, or was listening to it on tape. And he realized, like, I think I'm going to give this a try. And so he would text me and, say, what do you do with this? How do you cook beans? All these little things. And I really relished doing that for him. And we still communicate like that. This is a very good friend of mine. But the thing I mentioned in the email to you, Chuck, that I was glad our little talk got delayed a couple days, is because he texted me yesterday, and I think he's lost maybe 30 pounds, 35 pounds. It's a lot, and he texted me yesterday and he said he had his cholesterol tested. And the last time before he made these changes, his cholesterol was 204. Okay. And yesterday it was 140. 140,
wow.
Like that's 30% hacked off of his total cholesterol. I don't know what statins do, but do they do that? I mean, that's just incredible.
That is mind blowing, man.
Yeah.
That's the ripple effect, bro. The ripple effect.
So good job, Mike. Shout out to my friend Mike.
Attaboy, Mike. Attaboy, Mike. And listen, Pete, I wish that we could go on forever, man, but this has just been a fascinating hour that we've had the opportunity to spend with you. And I know that you are very much open to opportunities in the plant-based space, whether it's writing. I know that this is where you want to push your chips. You want to go all in with this, man.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a pleasure, talking to you. I should mention, Chuck, I think I told you this, but the first podcast I started listening to in this world was Plant Strong. And I heard you on there, and that's how I got turned onto PCRM. I'm a huge fan, and it's been fun to talk. And yes, we could talk for hours, I'm sure. But I love the idea that someone might hear this and think like, I'm going to play this for my, I want my husband to listen to this because he's 46 and, is a guy's guy, but he wants to lose 40 pounds or whatever, and so, yeah, I mean, I love being in this world. I loved going to the podcast that, the live show that you did in New York City. And so, yeah, I mean, anywhere I can use my, my story or my abilities or writing or whatever, I just love to do it because I'm such a believer.
All right, my man. Well, listen, the privilege has been all mine, and I can guarantee you that what you're hoping for in terms of somebody playing this for that guy's guy in their life, it's going to happen. It's
Yeah,
absolutely going to happen, man.
yeah,
This show is so powerful, man, and that is a privilege that I do not take lightly. And so
cool.
we need more stories like yours, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm proud to tell it on here.
You're a good man. All right, my friend, I appreciate your time. Stay well.
Thank you, Chuck. Take care.